Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Ben Petrie, an actor and filmmaker you might know as the writer and director of the Canada's Top 10 honored short film Her Friend Adam, in which he starred opposite his longtime partner and collaborator Grace Glowicki, or from his appearances in Graham Foy's August 22nd This Year, Matt Johnson's Blackberry, and Grace's own film Tito. And Ben and Grace co-star in his first feature, The Heirloom, as a couple trying to stay sane during the COVID lockdowns by adopting a rescue dog. The film had its world premiere in Rotterdam earlier this year and opens in Toronto this Thursday, November 28th at the TIFF Lightbox, before kicking off a regular run at the Carlton and the Revue on Friday the 29th, with more screenings to follow across Canada. It's strange and spiky and funny and sweet and really good. You should check it out. Ben chose City Lights, Charlie Chaplin's 1931 masterpiece that found the little tramp falling in love with a blind flower girl, played by Virginia Cheryl, who's mistaken him for a millionaire. Setting out to raise the money for an operation to restore her sight, the tramp winds up in one frantic situation after another, and Chaplin uses the premise to layer comedy on top of pathos in a truly remarkable way, which is even more remarkable for being performed without a single word of spoken dialogue 4 years into the age of the talkie. It must have looked like career suicide, except that it wasn't. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I just chose City Lights because I love it. It's comedy in its purest form. I love Chaplin, and City Lights is him at his most graceful, effortless. It's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, City Lights. It's like comedy that's been distilled and crystallized into such a pure form. It feels like I'm going to cry when I'm watching City Lights, not because of any of the melancholy parts of the movie or any of the pathos in the movie, but just because of the sheer beauty of the comedy. The purity and gracefulness of the comedy moves me so much every time that I watch it.
That's lovely. I did get choked up last night. I watched it again. It probably been 10 years since whenever the Blu-ray came out was the last time I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had forgotten just how hard those last shots hit. Like he doesn't even go for a big melodramatic swell the way you would now. He just leaves you in it. Yeah. But it's so powerful, I think, because the comedy is also so well earned. Gary Giddens wrote the essay in the Criterion package and said that the melodrama is as big as it is because the comedy is as big as it is. Like if one overpowered the other, it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. But everything is such a huge swing. Like he's going for devastating belly laughs and trying to destroy audiences. But the boxing sequence is like 12 minutes long if you include the before and after. And you're right, it's nonstop. But it's also, watching it this time, I just realized how elegant it is and how rhythm and repetition are so intrinsic to every one of those sequences. Mm-hmm. The aborted suicide sequence, which, like in 1931, should not have been funny at all.
Yeah. So dark. I mean, I think I read that essay also, and I think it says, does humor get any darker than that in that scene? But elegant is the word. It's a marvel in that sense. It may as well be ballet, that movie.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It is so, and because again, he chose to do it. He chose to make a silent film, or a film without dialogue anyway, for the most part. In 1930, when that wasn't an option or even desired, the world had moved on, and he just, I honestly couldn't tell the first few times whether it was the work of someone who was so completely disappeared into his own ego that he couldn't conceive of the world moving forward until he was ready, or if it was just somebody who understood that the thing he did worked best in this medium. I mean, we don't knock directors for shooting in black and white when it's appropriate. But the idea that he was a classicist, and he was absolutely a perfectionist and an egomaniac, sure, but there's question as to exactly when the music credits were settled. It was clearly like the version we see on the disc has been altered from the original title sequence. They've inserted the credit for Jose Padilla, and there's also the resolution was good enough this time that as I was watching it, I realized that a question mark had been erased and turned into an exclamation point.
Oh, when?
Oh, it's about halfway through in one of the intertitles. Somebody says something declaratively, but it was originally a question, like an expression of bafflement. And obviously that's how important it is to him that everything, he didn't generate new titles.
Yeah.
Spending $1 million on this thing, but nope, last minute, scratch it out, fix it. But when you see the work, the choreography, it's seamless. And the space that he allows for, like, those scenes go on and on and on.
Yes.
And they don't flag. They flag on the fifth or sixth viewing because you're familiar with it, I guess. But I remember thinking the first time through when I saw it, I think I might have seen it in film school, where it's just like, this is what you can do if you have everyone's participation and the commitment of your entire crew. And then also you make people feel stuff, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, on the side, that's the other reason I wanted to choose it as well, was I just think it's so cool, and it continues into modern times as well. His choice to continue making a silent picture with the acknowledgement that, yeah, this had a synchronized soundtrack and sound effects and all of that. It wasn't a true silent film, I suppose, in that respect, but for the tramp to not speak, I mean, impossible to not think about Chaplin's ego as a figure, but it would have been a tragedy for the tramp to speak. I'm so grateful that he did never had the tramp speak in language, notwithstanding the gibberish scene in modern times that I would love to talk about too.
Oh, we have room, sure, yeah.
Yeah, but that's just so beautiful to me that he would continue to make a silent picture when talkies were all the rage. And right from the opening scene, like the mayor comes out, or whoever that official is comes out to introduce this statue, and he has this kind of ridiculous kazoo sound represent the speech. And then the mayor introduces some other official looking woman, and she speaks in a slightly higher pitch kazoo. And right off the top, this phenomenon of talkies is just getting roasted in such a hilarious way. And then for them to unveil the statue, and there's the tramp being the tramp, defacing this new statue of dignity in the city. It just warms my heart, man. It just warms my heart. And then for it to be the greatest silent film of all time, in my opinion, it's just so beautiful.
I mean, you make a good case. It's also one of the handful of silent films that you can look at, and there's not a lot of objectionable material. I was impressed with that. There's
very true.
We just as timing had it, we watched Blazing Saddles the night before in a new 4K restoration, and it was more shocking, I think, to realize that Blazing Saddles is closer to City Lights than we are to Blazing Saddles culturally. And so much of what was daring in Blazing Saddles feels really uncomfortable now. I mean, it's supposed to be. The film is about, the movie is about power and racism and cynicism. But I saw Blazing Saddles when I was like 7, and that was perceived as an okay thing to do.
You're making me need to rewatch Blazing Saddles. I haven't watched it in a while because I remember that movie so fondly. And
Yeah,
has such an irreverent send up. So how did it strike you now?
It's a lot less funny. It just full stop. The cultural context is different. Nobody was supposed to be horrified when those words were thrown around. It's just funny that Bart is smarter than the white people.
I'll have to go back and watch it.
It's a really interesting experience. I hadn't seen it in, I'm going to guess, 25 or 30 years. It's been a really long time. And I saw that, I remember seeing it in a theater at a re-release when I was a kid. Whereas my parents thought Young Frankenstein might be too scary for me. So
now that holds up. I mean,
that one holds up. That's a lovely film.
A couple weeks ago with Grace, because it was one of the inspirations for her second feature, which is also kind of a Frankensteinian tale.
Ooh.
So that one's fresh on my mind, and by God, that's sublime. It's just sublime. It hits the same place in City Lights to me, where it's comedy that's so good, I feel like I'm going to weep from the sheer beauty of it. Like just divinity to me, that level of perfectly crystallized comedy.
Well, you said that earlier about the weeping, and I get that with musicals, weirdly enough. That's
Mhm.
my trigger when something is so well executed and does the thing that musicals do, which is vault you out of the world of an ordinary film into something that
Yeah.
you've never seen before or encountered before. When they get it right, oh, I love that. Um, City Lights has it's a combination of craftsmanship and raggediness,
Hmm.
right? I think
Readiness.
Yeah, I think it's simply because my brain treats it as a primitive artifact because it's a silent, because it's presented in a certain way, because the camera's cranked a certain way during some of the comedy scenes, and sometimes you can see a wire here and there because we've reached a point now where
Hmm.
resolution is good enough. I'm a little scared to see the 4K because backdrops are going to look like backdrops, and
Hmm.
um, rear projection stuff with the car. There was no rear projection stuff with the car, right? Like in that those scenes where they're driving around, they're just driving around Los Angeles. That's remarkable. Seeing
It is.
1930 Los Angeles just in the background of a shot, casually with palm trees around.
Hmm.
Um, but it's not primitive in a bad way. It's This is what they did at the time with the tools available,
Hmm.
and what they do is, or what Chaplin specifically does, because a lot of other filmmakers simply didn't try, is use the limitations of space. Watching Blazing Saddles now, I realized like half of it is shot like a proscenium. It just has no
Hmm.
visual style at all. It's Brooks
Hmm.
shooting in widescreen and scared that he's
Hmm.
not going to catch everything. So there are a lot of these master takes with people just. It's not just Hedley Lamarr in his office pontificating to the audience. There are a lot of scenes where the camera just doesn't move and people act forward. And Chaplin never does that.
Hmm.
Half of the fun of watching the tramp is seeing him from behind
Hmm.
and falling
Hmm.
over and picking himself
Hmm.
up or
Hmm.
hiding behind the referee,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the orchestration of that, knowing that the audience will find it funny and not worrying about whether they see his face.
Hmm.
That stuff's just beautiful. And it is, I guess, primitive also applies to the cinematography because their camera moves maybe 4 times, and when it does, it's really
Hmm.
harsh. Someone is wheeling this thing around because they haven't figured out smooth dollies yet.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because of course in 1930 everybody was shooting very still because they had to account for microphones. Chaplin
Hmm.
knows he doesn't have to do that,
Hmm.
and he's pushing the tech forward
Hmm. Hmm.
into panning shots, but it's always in the service of comedy. He's doing it to catch a response or a reaction, or one time I think he follows the flower girl over a bit and then
Yeah.
comes back. But
Yeah, that amazing moment in the scene where he meets the flower girl and she first mistakes him for a rich man.
mhm.
And I think the camera pans over just to catch some irrelevant pedestrian getting into a
The
Rolls
limo,
Royce,
yeah.
yeah, or a limo, and then it pans back to her. It's one of the most concise, incisive pans and pan backs in that I've ever noticed because it communicates such an important misdirection for the story that she thinks that he's this wealthy man in such a concise little beat. One elegant pan over here, pan back. And it's a good microcosm for the movie because again, it's so succinct, it's so incisive, it's so elegant and appears so effortless. And yet you read that they were shooting that scene for days upon days upon days, and he was laboring madly over how to communicate this idea of her misunderstanding his identity. And then you see it in the movie, it's 3 seconds long, it's effortless, and it would barely even occur to you that it was some brilliant writerly convolution because it's just so graceful and again effortless. And the whole movie is kind of like that. Like the boxing match, the fact that that's a 12-minute sequence, I mean, it feels like so it feels you don't notice a single second slip by. It's like trying to count the amount of seconds that are going by while your soul is being tickled. I lose all track of time when something is being done so elegantly and gracefully.
I think now it simultaneously feels like a really long movie and a really short one just because of the structure. I think watching it again, I was really surprised at how little screen time we actually spend with Virginia Cheryl.
Mm-hmm.
The Flower Girl is what, maybe 20, 25 minutes of the whole thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah,
romance is so, like, it never really leaves us. Everything he's doing is for her.
yes, totally. Yeah, very true. Yeah, her character is probably the thing that feels the most dated to me about the movie is the there's a sentimentality around her character that more than anything is just a bit dull at times, particularly in the beginning. But yeah, that's the if I could change, yeah, that's the one thing about City Lights that I find a little bit uh, showing its antiquity at this point. But yeah, but she's wonderful in the movie, and I guess she was nearsighted as a person, and that helped her give such a convincing visage of a blind person.
Yeah, I read that too. I'm surprised at how naturalistic her performance is, not just as a blind person, but as somebody in a Chaplin movie, right? There's not a
Yeah,
lot of swooning or
yeah,
fluttering.
yeah.
Most of the roles in his films are people acting with their whole face,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
this conception of the character just removes that need.
Yeah,
And so she's
yeah.
just this slight, small. She's not pathetic or pitiful or pitiable.
No,
She, at
no.
no point is the movie ever, other than the whole rent is due thing. Like
Yeah.
she has agency in
Hmm.
um, her own desires and her dreams. And ultimately, yeah, she just ends up buying a flower or having a flower shop, running, managing. I'm not sure. It's a little
Yeah.
vague,
Hmm.
but she ends up with a flower shop rather than doing anything other than the thing she used to do. So she's still clearly pursuing the thing she loves. Now she just has her vision as well. Small spoilers for an almost 100-year-old film. But yeah, I know what you mean. It is the kind of thing you expect to see from a film like of this vintage, where the characterizations and the dynamics and of the plot are fairly simplistic.
Hmm. Whereas the suicidal millionaire character is utterly timeless. I mean, that doesn't wear it may be it's broad in a sense, but it doesn't show its age. It hasn't rusted at all to me. It's still as hilarious and vital as it must have been in 1931 to me.
And the joke is so simple that when he's
Yes.
drunk, he remembers the tramp, and when he's sober, he
Yes.
doesn't. And
Yes.
on a dime, will just sober up as well.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a perfect comic engine because you just don't. And supposedly this was something he'd come up with for a silent that he never used.
Uh-huh.
And I
Uh-huh.
get that because, like, think about the facial expressions, right? Like that would play in a silent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You could communicate it without any other logic, and just having his valet be so protective of him
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
obedient
Mm-hmm.
creates endless frustration for the tramp too.
Mm-hmm.
But then finding the context, like, I think after the depression, having him be suicidal for no stated reason also works, even though the depression maybe didn't happen in this movie because everybody else has money and he's
I
going to all
mean,
these fancy parties.
you know what? I had the same impression that it was for no stated reason at first, but then I recalled that at the beginning there's a little bit of an implication that his wife has just left him.
That's right. She sent for
Yeah.
her things.
Yes, exactly. So there is that, I suppose. But I almost like his character better without having that motivation for his suicidal drive. Just ch the tramp with a suicidal millionaire in the abstract. So those are perfect partners.
Yeah. And I do think we spend more time with Harry Myers than we do with Virginia Gerald, right? Like, he's
I think we do
around
too.
more
Yes. Yeah, I think we do too.
and is
Actually,
ultimately her benefactor.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And her unwitting benefactor. Once Chaplin gets, I mean, I love the opening scene of the movie, and then it gets a bit dull for me for like maybe 5, 10 minutes when he's first meeting the Virginia Cheryl character. Once he gets drunk with the millionaire with Harry Myers, I feel like that's when the rocket ship really launches. Nobody does drunk better than Chaplin.
Yeah. He is so, and even in his sober physicality, he's fun. But yeah, you loosen him up. The scene with the at the restaurant with the ice rink, which is
Yeah.
just there. There's no actual reason for it. I kept waiting for a punchline where there'd be dancers or some skating team waiting to come out, and there's just a slippery space. It might not even be an ice rink. It looks like an ice rink, but maybe it's just
He
well
reacts as
polished.
though it is. I think it's just a polished marble or something like
Yeah,
that.
of course, marble floor. It could be,
Yeah.
but I've always just assumed that it was a skating rink for no particular reason because rich people can afford that sort of thing.
Yeah, his performance when he first steps onto that, yeah, is just phenomenal.
And no one
I-
else is struggling. He's
yeah,
just completely liquid in that moment.
yeah, struggling magnificently. I love as well that moment when he's eating the spaghetti and then he mistakes the confetti for spaghetti.
Yeah,
And again, it's like there's a lot of jokes in the movie where maybe you see them coming, like, oh, he's gonna mistake this confetti for the spaghetti, and it's funny. But then he takes it to this other level where then the tramp actually notices that the spaghetti he thinks he's eating is coming from the ceiling. And instead of doing what the 99% of comedians would do at that point, which is have him, cut it off, cut the spaghetti and try to see if anybody noticed or something like that, he reacts to this grand string of spaghetti coming from the ceiling as though it's a challenge from God, that he
yeah.
needs to follow this light beaming down from the heavens and follow it all the way up into the firmament. Eat it all. And he's always doing that, taking a joke that is funny to begin with, but maybe a bit predictable, maybe a bit broad, and elevating it into something sublime.
Yeah, it's the second act. Like his jokes have structure.
You're so right. Yeah, it is. Yes, yes.
The way the prize fight escalates and even the way the thing with the statue at the very beginning,
Yes.
it doesn't, you don't just get off the statue. You have to
Right.
impale yourself on another statue's sword, and you have to and maintain the hole in the pants for the entire movie, which I had forgotten
Yes.
as well. At the very
Yes.
end, that handkerchief comes out of the same hole that the sword
Yeah.
created, because of course he never fixed his pants. Why would that
Yes.
ever be a thing for the tramp? He's worse
Mhm.
for wear at the end of the film
Mhm.
rather than improved. But the statue stuff and the spaghetti confetti.
The anthem interrupting
That's right.
the community's anger at his defacing the statue. They all have to call to attention in the middle of it. It's a good way to put it. There's like an act one, an act two, an act three to his jokes. Yeah, there's contours to them all that continually surprise.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Severin Films' massive second volume of the All the Haunts Be Ours folk horror anthology, and the new 4K releases of Seven Samurai from the Criterion Collection, and Beetlejuice, North by Northwest, Blazing Saddles, and The Terminator from Warner Home Entertainment. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Simcast Blue Sky account. If you like reading about movies, I like writing about them. Come check it out. There was someone who cited Chaplin. I can't remember. Oh, I should know this. I wrote about it once. There's an actor and a director who when working together. Oh, it's Donnie Yen is the actor, and I can't remember who directed Flashpoint, but whoever directed Flashpoint was the collaborator, where they said they structured every fight scene like a Chaplin sequence, that they had to come up with a reason to either pause or derail and then resume the action. And in Flashpoint, he said the most obvious one is there's a scene where Donnie Yen fights somebody down a hill in a countryside village, all the way down the hill, stops, takes his jacket off, and continues fighting. And they said that was their specific nod to the silence, where it's just like, nope, no, there's more.
Mm-hmm.
It's like ballet. It's like, it is like a fight scene. And one of them, it is literally a fight scene where Chaplin is just finding new ways to demonstrate his virtuosity. And there was a moment, weirdly enough, it was the sandwich sequence where I realized, like, this is somebody who is doing this at this point in his career on the scale that no one else had ever attempted. Like what, there's a reason Wells says City Lights was one of his favorite movies, and
Mhm.
Kubrick cited it, and everybody else, because it is like it's an incredible auteurist work,
Mhm.
but it's not greedy in
Mhm.
in a way that an auteurist work can sometimes be. Like he doesn't. I'm not going to say he doesn't care if we know how much effort he's putting into it, because I'm sure that's essential to his work, that he wants to top himself and be celebrated for it. But it is like the nature of The Little Tramp gives him a bulletproof vest on ego, because he's playing
Mhm.
someone who is just trying to entertain himself with nothing else. And
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
can let you forget that this man has an army of technicians behind him, and an orchestra helping us understand, and everybody else is like, they're all in on it. But his conceit for the Tramp is just this perfect comic engine. Like there is no arguing with this little guy. We know he will not win, which is why
Mhm.
the ending is so powerful.
Mhm. Mhm.
We know he can't win because the world is against him, but for that 85 minutes beforehand, we're completely on his side because the world's against everybody.
Mhm. 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 It's beautiful.
In a weird way, it's a communist masterpiece.
Mhm. Actually, I'm only realizing now I have my City Lights poster right to my left. I have to show you here
Yeah, please.
from some Japanese re-release of City
Oh,
Lights in the 70s.
oh, that's a nice font for the
Yeah, it's
text
beautiful.
too.
And
Just
yeah,
a little blown out, just a little sad,
yeah.
obscured by fog.
Mhm. And I'm also, this is not a intended to be a convenient transition to the heirloom. I'm actually only realizing there is a nod to City Lights in the heirloom as well.
Okay.
Is that there's a moment in the movie where Grace's character, because she's always watching her family's home videos in the movie, and she opens up a DVD player, and the DVD player does the thing that DVD players sometimes do, where it kind of awkwardly spasms, and like the disk drive opens up halfway and then retreats and then comes back forward and retreats again and then
Hmm.
finally opens. And the disc that's in there is City Lights. And the DVD player performed the physical comedy in that scene as a tribute to this movie.
Ah,
Yeah.
I admit sometimes it's easier to come up with the comparison points to the selected film and the guest's work. This one
Mhm.
didn't really. I mean, the heirloom is sort of a deliberately messy, emotional. Like it doesn't have the stillness that Chaplin's choices can often have. Even though his films are frantic, there's usually just a sense of inviting the audience to watch something play out. And
Mhm.
again, not in a proscenium way, but just like, this is going to happen. Here we go. Are you still enjoying yourselves? Because now I have the next trick for you. The heirloom is much more about discovering what's going on along with the characters,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is not really Chaplin-esque. Like
No,
the whole point of
yeah.
city of his work is that we be ahead of the tramp more often than not.
Yes. Yes.
But the more I think about it, I don't know that you could tell the story you tell, and I'll set it up in the intro and we'll protect the plot, because that's
Mhm.
I don't want to blow anything for anybody. But yeah, we need to be riding along with the characters
Mhm.
in the heirloom, I think, in order for the effect to take hold, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
it's about a leap of faith.
yeah, I would agree. It's ex an extremely different movie to its discredit from
No,
from, from City Lights, as far as I'm concerned. Um, but yeah, but at least there's a little City Lights Easter egg in there. The other movie I was considering us chatting about was Real Life by Albert Brooks, which has significantly more obvious through lines to the heirloom. Still a very different movie, but the violent intrusion of cameras into the household and the way that that deranges family life. Yeah,
yeah,
another beautifully funny movie.
that one I could definitely see
Mhm.
in conversation. I wonder. I don't know that I've ever seen anything from Albert Brooks on Chaplin. He must have been inspired by some of it.
Yeah, he must have been. He must have been. And I kept on thinking at the end, I wonder, I'm sure that this is a comparison that other people have made, and it might not even be a comparison that's only legible to onlookers. It might have been an intentional homage in Manhattan. But the last shots of City Lights remind me so much of the last shots of Manhattan. They feel like sister shots, those last shots of Chaplin and the last shot of Isaac in Manhattan. Do you remember that ending?
Yeah, it's when he races back to Mariel Hemingway.
Yeah, and then it ends in these close-up shot reverse shots between the two of them.
Mhm.
And I want to look to see if Woody Allen has ever mentioned a comparison there because he has a similar kind of tragic look on his face at the end too, of someone who is kind of being seen for who they really are by their love interest at the very end of the movie. And there's this look of like tremendous yearning, guilt, desperation, melancholy, having been busted while still yearning. Yeah, this reminds me. I don't know why I'm transitioning to that, but just thinking of Albert Brooks, Chaplin, Woody Allen,
Yeah, comedy of neurosis of the 70s. I
comedy
mean,
of
there's
yeah,
definitely the two go hand in hand for a little while and then
yeah,
break off in their own directions. It's funny, the Manhattan comparison came up somewhere else. Um, I was looking up some older reviews and found a bunch of reissue reviews. I think maybe it was Ebert who brought it up, but I don't know that I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Allen was influenced by or borrowed from City Lights in that moment because he is such uh, a magpie,
yeah.
mostly for Bergman, but he was lifting stuff here and there from Fellini and from everybody else, and of course he'd go for Chaplin. But I don't know that it works as intended in Manhattan because the structure of that film is existing to remind us how inappropriate that relationship is. Like even before all the other stuff about Woody Allen,
Yeah.
and he's constantly casting younger women to be opposite him. Manhattan was the first one, by no means the last. And we know that shouldn't work. Like that relationship is maybe not immediately doomed, but she will outgrow him very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, this isn't like City Lights just has this incredible wallop of connection. And I maybe it's simply that Chaplin was a better actor than Allen, but he's able to play somebody who is briefly terrified at what this means. That shock of understanding that the tramp goes through, that A, things, she knows who I am, B, this is going to happen, C, what if it goes wrong, D, what if she finds out I'm an absolute complete failure and like not a millionaire, but in seconds. And then we're just left with it. We're left with all of that, the way it cuts out. That is so much more devastating than Woody Allen looking confused and nervous for 2 seconds and then Gershwin coming in to save us and tell us how to feel. Like this is so different.
Hmm.
But I can absolutely see how Manhattan would try to reference it, because Manhattan, like even from its title, it's supposed to be this grand statement on the way we live now and all of that, and really the only statement Woody Allen ever made. And I love some of his earlier funny films, and like probably right up to Crimes and Misdemeanors, is that this is how Woody Allen feels about things right now. Like
Hmm.
I don't think he's ever had an interest in an audience in the same way that Chaplin has. And so,
In an audience? How do you mean?
well, he the way he's talked historically, and I've never sat down with him to discuss this on any real level, but from all the stuff I've read of his and all the interviews he used to give, where he makes his movie and he moves on. I don't think he cares about how people respond to his work. So I
Hmm.
don't think he is interested in chasing cathartic moments the way that Chaplin is and leaving us in them.
Hmm.
As soon as he was halfway successful, he started making movies exclusively for himself, which
Hmm.
isn't like, it's not artistically wrong,
Hmm.
but it is potentially limiting,
Hmm.
especially when you don't have anyone to tell you that, oh, you know what, maybe you're not as strong an actor as Charlie Chaplin in this big final shot that you're hanging the whole movie on. I think that one comes down more to Hemingway's response
Hmm.
in her close-ups.
Yeah, her close-ups are amazing.
Mm.
Amazing. Yeah, though, yeah, to your point, I mean, I think Woody Allen's quote is something along the lines of when he dies, as far as he's concerned, you can take all of his movies and flush them down the toilet. He doesn't give a damn about them once he's dead, which is definitely does not feel true of Chaplin. It feels like yeah, yeah, Chaplin was aiming for something eternal, and Woody Allen is actively hostile to the idea. of the eternal.
Yeah. And I get that. I mean, that's the worldview that's in all of his movies.
Hmm.
Um, the universe is cold and empty, and we might as well just do what we want and be happy in the moment, which again has led to no end of trouble. Um, and like again, I'm not, and now I realize, of course, you can't really discount Chaplin's own improprieties and behavior, and yes, it was the style at the time, but that doesn't make it right. And I guess I just have because his films are not explicitly about a version of himself who lives in the world, it's much easier to sort of disconnect. But that is the the beauty of City Lights versus, say, Limelight, where he's playing an aging entertainer, and you're forced to take stock of who this person is and what his career was. The Tramp is a blank slate. He just shows up in every situation. I mean, again, it's the Bugs Bunny of it all.
Hmm.
He's just there to create chaos. Even though, and I love this bit. I love this bit so much, and it never goes away. The compulsive hat tipping, which
Hmm.
never feels inappropriate, but is
Hmm.
incredibly frustrating for everyone else. He is only ever trying to make friends, and
Yes.
he's
Yeah.
so bad at it.
When he tries to make friends with like the bulky boxer who replaces the guy he was gonna take a fall for,
Right.
he's giving him these incredibly effete greetings and shrugging his shoulders and tipping his hat. Yeah, it's just so funny how horribly he is making an enemy of this man while trying with desperation in every cell of his body to ingratiate himself with him.
Yes, this man who is going to beat him to
This
death.
man who's going to kill him. Yes. Mhm.
And it is just so sweet natured and simple. And it's one of those miracle concepts where it probably could have been played by almost anyone if they'd come up with it first. But Chaplin not only invented it, but wouldn't let go of it and kept
Mhm.
developing it and kept iterating the Tramp until by the time he shows up in City Lights and gets a win, like a proper happy ending, he's
Yeah.
been working towards that for 15 years and the audience knows it, right? Like that's the other thing. It's almost unthinkable to imagine the Tramp movies as a franchise because they're absolutely not. They're not what he was doing at all. It was the
Yeah.
thing that got people's attention. It was the thing that made money, so he kept doing it. But he also kept working on it and developing it. Franchise implies that you're just reheating the same thing over and over again. This is the culmination, and the Tramp would come back and in modern times is still ahead of him, and there are other things that he hasn't done yet. But I think this does feel like the end of it, right? Like there's
It
no
does.
he then had to create an entirely different world for the Tramp to exist in.
Yeah. 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 In my mind, Modern Times was before this. I know it came after, but this is the culmination of that character to me, the zenith of that character and everything he was doing with that character.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, there's nowhere else to go because to imagine the Tramp in a subsequent film would mean that the relationship ended. And I don't think I want that. I can't imagine that world.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
They're just making, pretty bouquets for the rest of their lives together.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
he's destroying half of them.
Hmm. Yeah, and he protected the character too, like to come back to the talkie thing. He protected it. He maintained it. He protected it. Yeah, it's the most successful harboring of a piece of intellectual property without spoiling the intellect, the IP of all time. Chaplin and the Tramp.
Yeah.
And then the fact that he managed to do it again, the like get away with being a silent character again with Modern Times. Was that 36 Modern Times? When was Modern Times?
I want to say yes, shot between 35 and 36, maybe.
Like that, then still another, yeah, came out 36. Another 5 years would go on into talking movies. And he still gets away with this character being, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, yeah, nonverbal. He speaks in that movie, but it may as well be nonverbal because he only speaks gibberish. And I don't know if this is apocryphal, but it was long ago. I remember reading that he had advertised Modern Times as Chaplin's first talkie. Like this was going to be the movie where Chaplin finally speaks. And all throughout the movie, you're watching it, waiting for Chaplin to speak. And then it builds to this climactic scene where he's going to need to sing a song and he sings it in gibberish. It makes me feel like I'm levitating, that degree of fidelity and loyalty to his form, the love of that form. And I really do believe, like we talked about the ego and his character and whatnot, but I really do believe it's was coming from a strong heart-based desire to maintain the universality of the character. And it's such a triumph that he was able to do that in City Lights and then continue to do that. It's just amazing.
Yeah. I mean, even ultimately, The Great Dictator is a message picture, and he does break character to deliver that message in a way that I mean, I can't imagine how it played in 1940. I imagine it worked really well. Now it just feels like, oh, you're still going. But
Mhm.
the stuff leading up to that is still beautiful,
Yeah.
and his sense of what the audience will take,
Mhm.
and how far he can push against this truly horrible thing that's happening elsewhere in the world that everybody is fully aware of but pretending isn't happening because they just don't want to think about it yet. Making that movie and releasing it in October of 1940 is,
Mhm.
a year after the invasion of Poland, is still not the sort of thing an egomaniac would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
you're you're
Totally.
you're you're taking a bigger risk there
Yeah.
than maybe
Yeah.
you ever have before, and that's pretty much the end of the Tramp character, right? That was the barber was the last one to
Mhm.
really fit that mold.
And he doesn't even feel like quite the tramp. It's some slight variation on the tramp, I feel, in that movie.
Yeah, well, just the fact that he can hold down a job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It's funny because I feel like my introduction to Chaplin, as I would bet a number of people my age's introduction to Chaplin would have been, was seeing the ending speech from the Great Dictator set to like the soundtrack, set to like a soundtrack song from Inception, like some grand like Hans Zimmer score with Chaplin's speech at the Great Dictator on YouTube. Like that was my first introduction to Chaplin, and I bet that that would be true of a lot of people
Wow.
generation. Yeah.
So what was your path after that? Where did you find the rest of it?
I think the next one that I saw was The Gold Rush, and that movie also features a number of sequences that are just so perfect that it makes me want to weep, and then I consumed them all in one big go. But like the number of friends who I've forced to watch the Dance of the Bread Rolls with me um, is maybe no longer than 10, but no smaller than 5.
God, I'm just thinking about the way that his films kind of were and weren't in not in the culture, but his stuff was out of print for a really long time. And there were restorations on DVD in the early 2000s, I want to say.
Mhm.
But 10 years before that, Johnny Depp did the bread roll bit in Benny and June, and people didn't know what it was.
Right.
Like it was actually a thing that had to be explained.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then 10 years later, his films were around. And then 20 years later, they're still now, they're talking about 4K restorations and new prints. And the estates are allowing all of it, which is wonderful. And I'm expecting Criterion to do like a big 4K box set at any given moment, but it hasn't happened
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
But we're just in a place where it's almost maybe they're waiting for the centenary, but it's almost 100 years of Chaplin now,
Mhm.
and the centenary of City Lights. I mean, um, and the bones that he laid down are still in use, right? Like the
Mhm.
concepts of melodrama and desire and frustration. He wasn't the first, but I think he perfected them.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree.
And so we talked about the reference that's baked into the heirloom, but is there something else of Chaplin's that you want to co-opt or use or reference? I mean, would you see yourself ever attempting that kind of elaborate, structured comedy.
I mean, that's the ideal to me, and it's definitely not something that I was striving for with the heirloom, and the heirloom is it's largely two characters talking, so it's very, very far from that. But to me, that is the absolute ideal. And yeah, I would say yes. I would love to try to make work that was more, the more and more that I watch the heirloom with audiences and think about what I wish I had done differently and what I want to do the next time, it is really about staring into the eye of comedy as much as possible and trying to. I just think it's such a beautiful art form. I come from a family where comedy was the central currency of all of our relationships. And, going into like your late 20s, as I was when I started making the heirloom, there's various angsts that you want to work through in your work. And as I get older, the more I want to dedicate my life to comedy and just to try to make something that crystallizes comedy. Like if I could make a movie that had even one sequence as pure and beautiful as the way that Chaplin executes the boxing sequence or the spaghetti sequence or the dance sequence or the chairs being removed from unsuspecting diners in that dance sequence, I would be a very happy boy. So that is absolutely where I want to go.
My thanks to Ben Petrie, whose first feature, The Heirloom, has its Toronto premiere this Thursday, November 28th at the TIFF Lightbox before moving to regular runs at the Carlton and Revue on Friday the 29th. Further screenings will follow across Canada. You should keep an eye on it. And thanks also to Ali Lemaire-Shedden. She knows what she did. You can follow Ben on Instagram at _Ben Petrie, and you can find City Lights on Blu-ray and DVD in the Criterion Collection and streaming on the Criterion Channel. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhep.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 43 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or this show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.